get any better than Storyteller, Eleanor Benjamin.
Thanks very much, Claudine. I'm really happy to be here. And while I've been sitting here waiting for my turn, I've watched that total board go up by about $900, and that's really such a satisfying feeling. And you don't need to feel shy about phoning while I'm telling my story, because I can tell stories in the midst of the most amazing chaos you've ever encountered. So just keep on phoning, keep on making those pledges. And now I'm going to tell you a story that comes from Ireland. I learned this story the way people in Ireland learn stories, the oral way. I listened to tape of the wonderful Toronto storyteller Alice Kane, who actually came from Northern Ireland, originally from Ulster. She worked for many years as a children's librarian at the Toronto Public Library, and she made a number of tapes, and she's my constant companion when I'm on the road. I just love listening to her stories. And this story that I'm going to tell you was collected in Ireland. I'm not quite sure by whom, but it's called The Corpse Watchers, and this is how it goes. It's a story of overcoming obstacles and making your dreams come true, and I think that's what this whole day is about. So here is The Corpse Watchers. There was once an old widow woman who had 3 daughters, and one day the eldest daughter came to her and she said, "Mother, bake me a bannock and cut me a collop, for I'm off into the world to seek my fortune." So the mother cut off some bread and some meat, and then she said to the girl, "Will you take all of this with my curse, or would you be happy with half of it for my blessing?" And the daughter said, "Oh, Mother, there's not enough there for even one person. I'll take all of it and I'll risk your curse." And whether her mother cursed her or not, I don't know, but she didn't give her her blessing. So the girl set off down the road with the lunch. And as afternoon came on, she grew tired and she sat down by the side of the road to eat her lunch. And just as she did, along came an old woman dressed in rags. And she came up to the girl and she said, "Oh, would you share some of your lunch with me?" And the girl said, "Oh, old woman, there's devil enough here for me alone. Be gone with you." And the old woman turned away sorrowful. And the girl ate the lunch all by herself, and then she went on down the road. And by evening she came to a little cottage and knocked on the door to see if she could find shelter there for the night. And a woman answered the door and she said, "I'd be glad to give you shelter for the night if you'd watch over my son, who's a corpse in the next room. If you watch over him all night for me, in the morning I'll give you a spade full of gold and a shovel full of silver." And the girl said yes, she thought she could do that. So the woman brought her into another room in the little cottage, and there was the young man laid out, a corpse. And then the woman left her alone and went away. And the girl sat there by the fireside, watching the corpse as the evening went on. And around midnight, all at once, the corpse sat up, stood up, and came over to the girl, looked her straight in the eye and said, "All alone, fair maid? All alone?" The poor girl was so terrified, she couldn't say a word. And again the corpse said, "All alone, fair maid? All alone?" And again the girl could not answer. Her tongue was tied. She was so afraid. And once again the corpse spoke to her, "All alone, fair maid?" And again she remained silent, and the corpse reached out a finger and touched her, and she was turned into a gray flagstone on the floor of the cottage. A few days later, back at the widow woman's cottage, the second daughter came and she said, "Mother, bake me a bannock and cut me a collop, for I'm off to seek my fortune." And once again the mother cut off some bread and cut off some meat and said to the girl, "Will you take the whole of this with my curse, or will you settle for half of it with my blessing?" And the girl said, "Oh, Mother, there's not enough for one person here. I'll risk your curse. Give me all of it." And so the mother gave her all of it. And the girl set off down the road with the meat and the bread. And it happened to her just as it had happened to her elder sister. She sat down to eat her lunch, and the old woman in rags came by and asked for a share of her lunch. And she too told the old woman to be off, that there wasn't even enough there for one. And when she went to the cottage, everything happened to her as it had happened to her older sister. And she was turned into a flagstone too. A little while passed, and now the youngest daughter came to her mother and said, "Mother, bake me a bannock and cut me a collop, for I'd like to go out into the world to seek my fortune." And then the mother said to her, "Will you take all of it with my curse, or would you settle for half of it with my blessing?" And the girl said, "Oh, mother, I'd rather have your blessing. Give me half of it." So she took the meat and bread, and she too set off down the road in search of her fortune. Midway through the afternoon, she grew tired and hungry, and she sat down by the side of the road to eat her lunch. And along came that old woman in the ragged clothes, and she said to the girl, "Fair maid, would you share some of your meal with me?" And the girl said, "Well, I don't have very much here, but what I have I'll share." And they ate the lunch together, and the old woman turned away with a joyful look on her face. But before she left, she said to the girl, "Wherever you go, I'll watch over you. I won't be far away from you." And then she was gone. The girl went on down the road, and she came to that little cottage by the side. And she knocked on the door, and the woman inside opened the door, and the girl asked for shelter for the night. And the old woman spoke to her again. "If you'll watch over my son, who's a corpse in the next room, in the morning, I'll give you a spade full of gold and a shovel full of silver." And the girl said yes, she thought that she could do that. So the woman showed her into the room, and there was the corpse all laid out, just as before. And the woman gave the girl apples and nuts to eat during the evening, and she sat down by the fireplace, and there were a cat and a dog sitting there. And she sat there and roasted the apples and began to crack the nuts, and she looked over at that corpse, and she thought, "Oh, isn't it a shame? Such a fine and handsome young man should be a corpse." She sat there by the fire, and at midnight the corpse stood up and came over and looked her straight in the eye and said, "All alone, fair maid? All alone, fair maid?" "All alone? I'm not," said the girl. "Here's Douse the dog, and here's the cat. I've apples to roast and nuts to crack, and all alone I'm not." "Well, you're a courageous girl," said the corpse. "You're a courageous girl indeed, but I bet you couldn't go where I have to go." And the girl looked straight at the corpse, and she said, "I promised your mother that I'd watch over you all the night, and I can go wherever you go." So the corpse said, "Oh no, you couldn't go where I have to go, for I have to go through the quaking bog. I have to go through the flaming forest. I have to go through the pit of terror. I have to climb the glass mountain and dive into the Dead Sea, and you couldn't do all of that." "Oh yes, I could," said the girl. And then the corpse was up and out the window, and the girl right after him too. And then they came to a great green hill not very far from there, and the corpse went up to the hill, and he knocked on a door that was right there. And he said, "Open up, green hills, open up, and let the light of the green hill go through." And a door opened. And then the girl said, "And let his lady through behind him." The corpse went through, and the girl followed. The girl could see up ahead the quaking bog, and the corpse was already halfway through, hopping along from hillock to hillock, little hummock to hummock, across the quaking bog. And the girl didn't know how she was going to do that. And then she looked to her side, and there was the old woman from the road, the one she'd shared her lunch with, only she was dressed much finer now. And she reached out a hazel wand and touched the girl's shoes, and they spread out several inches on each side, and the girl found that she could hop easily from hummock to hummock, and in no time she was through the quaking bog. She could see up ahead of her the flaming forest, and the corpse halfway through that too. But then there was the old woman from the road right beside her, with a great heavy cloak, all damp, and she put it over the girl's shoulders, and the girl walked through the forest without so much as singeing a hair on her head. And up ahead she could see it, the pit of terror. There were blue lights flashing in the pit of terror. She could see snakes and toads and all kinds of horrible things, and it sounded as if dreadful noises were coming out of the pit. But then there was the old woman, And the old woman stopped up the girl's ears with wax so she couldn't hear the dreadful sounds. And she walked through the pit of terror without hearing anything horrible. And she was clear through to the other side, and she could see up ahead the glass mountain and the corpse already halfway up it. But there was the old woman. And the old woman reached out her hazel wand and touched the girl's shoes and made them sticky. And she was up the hill in no time, right behind the corpse. And when she got to the top, the corpse turned around and said, "There now. You've come as far as you can go. You go home to my mother and tell her all that you've done. But you can't go any further than this." And the girl said, "Oh, yes, I can. Wherever you go, I'll go too." And the corpse walked over to the edge of the mountain and looked down and pointed and showed the girl, "There. Down there, that's the Dead Sea. Half a mile below. Go home now. You can't go any further." And with that, the corpse dived over the cliff and into the Dead Sea. But the girl jumped in right behind him. At first she was stunned as she fell through the air, but when she hit the water, her senses returned, and she found herself drifting down through the water. And above her, the sky turned from blue to green, and she drifted and drifted until all at once she landed in a green meadow, all filled with flowers, and there was already the corpse was there. And she landed in the meadow, and she was so tired, she just stretched out beside that corpse and fell asleep. When she woke up, she wasn't in the sea anymore. She found herself in a small bed back in the cottage where the corpse and his mother were waiting. Only now he wasn't a corpse anymore at all, no. He was alive, a fine, handsome young man. And he and his mother told the girl how a wicked witch had taken a fancy to him, and she wanted to marry him, but he wouldn't have any of her. And so the wicked witch had cast a spell on him, a spell that he would be a corpse, wavering between life and death, until a girl could be found who would come along and do everything that she herself had done that night, and restore him and break the spell. Then they asked the girl if there's anything she'd like, and she said, "Well, I'd like to have my sisters back." And instantly her two sisters were restored to her. They weren't flagstones on the floor anymore. And they went home to their mother, and whether they were any better after that, I couldn't tell you. But the girl ended up marrying the young man. And if they didn't live happily ever after that, I hope that we all may do. Thank you very much.
Break for us, except from now until 6.